Hello, this is Andy from narcolepsypumpkin.com. So, the three laws of test-driven development. Law number 1. We are not to write any production code unless it is to make a test pass. Law number 2. We are not to write any more of a unit test than is sufficient to fail, and failing to compile is failing. Law number 3. We are only allowed to write as much production code as is necessary to make the failing test pass.
Sure, Blofeld. You want me to write tests that pass first? No, Mr. Bond. I expect them to fail.
Writing only enough tests as to fail and compiling is failing. You write var result equals well, that'll be the start of my application, won't it? So some function. Well, that fails. So we flip the coin. We've now got to write enough production code to make that test pass or compile. So that's effectively just write the function. So once we've got a function with nothing in it, well, it compiles again, so back to the test. So next thing is, well, I've got to pass it something, so I need to pass it in a something object, potentially. Oh, well, that doesn't exist, so I'll have to create the object, and my production code now, it doesn't compile because I've got no parameters on my function, so you've got to go put the parameter in your function, but only so you'd end up with just an object, because you don't know what type it is yet. Then you're back to the test code. So this loop is really, 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 really small. There is a temptation to wander off and write too much. There's also a mentality that you get where you do the waterfall test-driven development. So you do the big upfront test. So almost write a test that basically tries to assert the entire behaviour of the whole application end to end in one test, and then you write the whole application to pass the test.
Waterfall is the route to the dark side.
That's not test-driven development. Avoid that big upfront test thing. Go small and go degenerate first. It's easier to write tests that assert how it will go bang first, then start to drive out, how it should actually behave on your happy path. While you're writing tests and write a little bit of production code and going to and from doing your test-driven development, is that you don't always necessarily think at that point about implementing solid principles.
Your powers of structure are weak, old man.
And in a lot of cases, it only makes some sense to contemplate that when you've implemented enough production code that it warrants refactoring or changing.
Remember to refactor your code.
Some of the advantages of test-driven development are not always that obvious. The biggest one for me is that it allows distraction. We don't live in a perfect world by any means, so we get meetings, we get people calling. When you're coding in that flow and then you move away from it and come back to it, and you've no idea where you were, no idea what you've written, no idea where you were going with it even. What test-driven development gives you in that respect is, whenever you turn away from a piece of code, it's in one of two states. It is either sat there with a failing test ready for you to make pass, ready for you to write a new test. Finding where you are takes a lot less time. It does lend itself to writing code that is almost defect-free. Really, all the defects that exist in test-driven development are just tests you forgot to think of at the time you were developing it. They're just the degenerate use of the code that you didn't think of, or the test case or the use case scenario that was missing from the original requirements. But you can just add that in and make it pass. Simple. If it's only those little things that are missing out of your test suite, they're really easy to add in.
Everything is unfolding as I have foreseen.
Test-driven development is, it is the most alien thing to every developer ever. It's not an easy thing to get your head around. Some of the other downsides to test-driven development. It can give you a Boswonk architecture. And that is, writing the test first and writing the code sort of removes a certain amount of mindful thinking about architecture. So you end up with something that works, absolutely. Something that's decoupled, absolutely. But there's an opportunity there to, in part of the refactoring, to look a little bit deeper at the architecture of the code. And in some cases, I have been known to almost inline everything and then refactor it back out again. The only reason I'm comfortable doing that is because doing test-driven development means that you've got a very granular suite of tests that assert behavior. You could technically throw all the code away that you've written for the production side and then just rewrite it to make all the tests pass. I've not hung, I'm just thinking.